Welcome, everybody. My name is Patrick Miles. I am the Director of Social Innovation for United Way's Venture Forward. And welcome to today's webinar. You guys are in for a treat. We have one of our really good friends and fellow innovators, I should say, as well. Michael Weiss. He's going to lead today's webinar on a really good topic, and a topic that is of really a high importance, we feel right now, especially in the season that we are in. I'm going to have Michael introduce himself in just a moment. As always, we would ask that you open up your chat feature. If you haven't done so, we'll use that. And in the meantime, as we kind of get things started, if you'll do us a favor, in the Zoom, you'll see that if you're looking at all your pictures here, you'll see a series of, in the upper right-hand corner, of your name. If you'll click the three dots, that little icon, and then hit rename, and if you'll just enter your first name, comma, and then your agency, that way we can see who is on this call and what agency you're with. So if you'll do that, you can also do that if you open up your participants window, which there's an icon in your control panel that says participants, and I would encourage you to open that anyway. That window is also another control panel that you can access, and we might ask you to utilize some of the features you'll see there. There's a yes, a no, a slower or faster icon, or a handshake, or clapping hands, and thumbs up, thumbs down, all of those sort of things. We are all about virtual feedback and continuous conversation. And this is one way that you can be engaged in today's conversation, is just through the use of simple emoticons. And then lastly, make sure that you're taking notes here, and what you're about to learn and hear is things that you definitely can employ now, but it will be especially important as we continue to progress in our re-entry and reopening strategies across our different organizations. So with all of that said, again, welcome to everybody. And Michael Weiss is today's webinar host and facilitator. He is the owner operator of MSW Innovative. Obviously, MSW has to deal with his name.
Don't give away secrets.
Share a little bit about his background here and experience. But again, welcome to everybody, and welcome to Michael.
Thank you, Patrick, very, very much. So we're going to get rolling. We got a lot to cover. I do want this to be very interactive, so do feel free to ask questions in the chat window. Patrick and Ada are keeping an eye on that, and they'll make sure I see your questions. So feel free to ask them at any time, or for me to cover something if I skip over. So as Patrick introduced myself, I do have my own consulting company, MSW Innovative, helping organizations, both businesses and nonprofits, with innovation, design, organizational agility, and transformation. And we are certainly in a time of transformation right now. And it was interesting to hear Patrick talk about some of the ways that you can interact using the hand raising gestures, things like that, because we are going to talk about exactly some of those things. Our objectives, as we talked about in the, as was promoted, we're going to talk about what are employees going through right now? What are their needs? What are their motivations? How do we keep them engaged and highly engaged and high performers too? We're going to talk about this a lot. We are not trying to just get through this time period. The world has changed. So how are we going to thrive in this new world? And then we're going to talk about a lot about communication best practices. And hopefully your organization will result in having a lot less stress, much more effectiveness, and an improved work environment. And hopefully even grow and continue to exceed the goals that you've set for yourselves. So life has changed. 2020, I did not keep my receipt, so I'm not able to return 2020 for a full refund. So we are here to stay, and the virtual world is here to stay. You've all been reading about this to various degrees. You can cite all different kinds of facts and figures, but people are freaking out. People are changing. We are suffering a lot from fear and panic in a way. How are we going to change? And people are worried a lot about the future. People are worried a lot about what are they going to do in their job going forward. So we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, hopefully, especially in the nonprofit world. This is one of the most fundamental things that we look on. Unfortunately, in a time of crisis, people tend to go down towards the bottom of the pyramid. Your employees might be at a place in the middle, working on esteem, working on their belongings in terms of their work environment. But as the crisis comes, they plummet, they go right down to the bottom, and they're worried about survival. And then as we meet those needs, we start thinking about safety. So if you're familiar with this pyramid, everything below self-actualization, esteem, belonging, safety, and physiological, those are what we call deficit needs, meaning they are inverse to how well they're being met. The more that need is being met, the less of a motivator that it is. So one of our jobs as leaders is to help our people move back up through the pyramid and keeping them engaged. So what drives behaviors, right? Okay, that's in the chat window. What drives behaviors? There are lots of motivators for behavior, but some of the big ones that are coming into play right now are a group of negative and a group of positive motivators. People have a lot of concern around their emotional state, their economic state, as well as just a sense of inertia. You know, sitting at home, kind of being trapped in quarantine, uncertainty of the future tends to freeze people in place. So there's a lot of inertia at play. These are things as leaders we need to overcome. Positive motivators are things we want to bring more of into the workplace, giving people a sense of purpose, helping them realize and see their potential, and a sense of play. These are very big and important motivators for this time. So what do we need? These are the three areas we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about focus, communication, and adaptation, all underscored with the foundation of empathy. So let's start with empathy. What is it? A lot of people confuse this term, even especially in the nonprofit space. So as a quick overview to understand the difference between these terms, pity is, I acknowledge you're in pain. Yep, that's a shame. Sympathy is, I care about your pain. I feel badly that you are suffering. Empathy is, I understand your pain. And compassion is, I want to alleviate your pain. I want to do something to help make life better for you. Empathy is where we need to focus in the workplace as leaders, right? It's important to understand with empathy that understanding how someone feels is not the same thing as feeling it. Empathy is often misstated as feeling what the other person feels. You can't, right? Everyone's pain is unique. Even if someone you know lost a loved one, God forbid, and you've lost a loved one, it's not the same, right? So everyone's pain is unique, and that's important to remember. As you are expressing empathy and acting with empathy, to not make assumptions that you know how the other person feels. It's talking to them, checking in with them. It's acknowledging and validating without judgment. These are critically important things. Everyone has different levels of anxiety. Everyone has different methods of dealing with anxiety, and their methods might not be yours. And this is why I'm focusing on empathy rather than compassion, because you may try to fix it by, oh, you should stop watching the news. Well, that might work for you, but not for them. The understanding is just validating, listening, and acknowledging, and then helping them in an environment of your workplace get through it. Okay, so sorry, I will try to speak a little louder. Yes, I know we've got two voices here in the office and it gets a little loud. So is this better, Ada? I will speak a little louder. Okay, so moving on. So that is empathy. Let's talk about focus, all right? When we talk about focus, this is about keeping our attention on the work, reducing distractions, and understanding what really matters in the workplace. It's not about ignoring what's going on in people's lives, but it is about helping people focus on the work and the things that matter. So focusing on an employee's needs. Remember your Maslow, right? People are really focused on their own personal needs, worries, and concerns. So what we can do in the workplace is help them reduce those fears. So these are some of the real basics. Do they have the equipment they need, right? Would a monitor help them instead of just using a laptop? Do they have a phone that works? Do they have internet access? Does everyone have webcams, headsets? The things that some of us take for granted because we might be in a fortunate position, but not everyone has available. So as we move into this new world order, does everyone have quite physically and literally what they need to be effective? Also looking at flexibility, giving people some slack with maybe the hours that they work, dress codes, things like that. Focusing on people's need to flex as well as what's really important. Providing a rhythm. Routine brings comfort. Routine brings reassurance. And so establishing that routine and rhythm at work also helps people very much move back up the pyramid. When we talk about reassurance, we want to speak with candor, right? We want to share our own concerns, our own experiences, but we have to show strength, confidence, and stability. There's a phrase that people are familiar with called emotional contagion. People look to their bosses all the time. This is one of the first lessons I had to learn when I started managing people, in that if I'm stressed out or I'm walking around with a worried look on my face, that's going to freak out my employees. So be especially mindful of your tone, your phrasing, the looks on your face, and then try to project that to your employees. And I'm going to mute myself just for 1 second here.
As Michael is discussing with his wife here, just know that, as Ada mentioned in the chat feature, this is a time for all of us just to remember that we're all working from home. And so it's him. So a little patience as we go through that as well. Thanks.
Exactly. Good teaching point. That was a good teaching moment. So my wife and I are still working out how we share a very small office together. Okay. So projecting that strength, being aware of your own anxiety, but be transparent in a way, right? If you come across as everything's fine, not solving any problems, it's going to come across as disingenuous. So it is okay to share the struggles that you yourself are going through. It's a time to reaffirm your commitment, not only to your employees, but to your stakeholders and your customers, right? The world has changed, but your organization hasn't. It is still there to serve the exact same purpose and the exact same people. The way you do it may change, and we're going to talk about that in the adaptation section, but reaffirm the commitment of who your organization is and why it exists. And then lastly, expressing trust in your people, right? Some people in times of crisis, especially leaders, they get a bit more into micromanagement mode. This is a time to show and display trust in your people, that we are one team, we are in this together, and we're going to get through this together. So showing that trust in people and your abilities. So when we remember, slide advance, when we talk about focusing on the work, right? We want to remember why we do what we do. Again, people in crisis can get very tactical. They can focus down on the details and really forget why we do things, why we're in business, why we exist in an organization. So reaffirming the vision, mission, and goals of your organization, starting with the why. Remember when we talked about motivators before? Reaffirming the vision, mission, and goals of your organization not only plays on the purpose and potential motivators, it also helps avoid inertia. It helps avoid a little bit of that why bother mentality that people can fall into. And then also focusing at this time, processes and procedures, reaffirming that, focusing on results and outcomes. So when we talk about focus, it's not ignoring people's personal life or bringing empathy into play all the time, but it is that focus on the work. It's about our customers, our stakeholders, the people we're serving, and keeping people focused on that and then meeting their needs in whatever way you possibly can to help them get there. That's focus. And again, apologize for the situation, but when we talk about, as I say, this new working order, I'm having that as well. But any questions at this point that people might have, please feel free to just put them into the chat window. So next, we're going to talk about communication. Communication is absolutely one of the most critical things we can be doing at this time. It is impossible to over-communicate during this time. It is very easy to overlook how much talking happens in the workplace, right? Casual questions, hallway conversations. There's a feeling of stability and reassurance that happens from all those conversations. When people dispersed into a virtual workplace, a lot of companies and organizations, that was one of the first things they lost. The only time they ever met was when there was a crisis or an immediate need. And that is not something that we need to be doing during these times. So communicate, 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 okay? Not only do people want to hear from you, they want to be heard. They want to make sure that they can still reach you and talk to you when they need to. So yes, we're going to use email, but let's not rely on it 100%. We want to avoid the email flood. There are lots of ways to communicate, and we want to make sure we make use of a variety of methods. If you've heard the phrase 7 times, 7 ways, the more different channels of communication you can open, the more engaged your people will be. And when we talk about communication, we're not just talking from a leader to the team or a leader to the workforce. It's also peer-to-peer. We want to make sure you have an environment set up, again, meeting people's basic needs, where they can easily talk to each other, right? So that those daily check-ins, the 15-minute stand-up in the morning, weekly huddles, having those regular one-on-one meetings, encouraging team meetings, and think about the different ways it can be done. Certainly video conferencing, but also instant messaging and other aspects. And I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to give a long list of tools at the very end of this presentation. So the ways in which you can do that, some of which you might have, others you might want to grab. So I will give you some of those lists. You want to make sure you provide lots of updates, not just on projects and things that are happening within your organization, but keep people updated on what's happening in the industry and the community that you're serving. Make sure that people have access to this information so that no one is feeling lost. That's one of the big things that inhibits engagement, is people feeling lost and isolated. And so the more we communicate together, the more engaged people will feel. And remembering communication is a two-way conversation, right? It's not just presentations. It's not just speaking at people. As a leader, especially, you want to be listening almost more than you're talking, right? In meetings, you want to make sure you're facilitating rather than dictating, practicing your active listening skills and keeping everyone engaged. That might be a time for you to ramp up these skills if it's not something you're familiar with. You can also rotate that facilitation. You can ask people on your team to take turns leading the meetings, keeping them engaged, keeping that sense of team and belonging to avoid the isolation and avoid the inertia. Again, some of these key things that I'm highlighting here: be visible, be available, listen, encourage the ad hoc communication. While we are doing our meetings virtually, don't forget the basics. We've probably all read tons of articles and maybe have taken courses on how to have effective meetings. Let's not forget them. Every meeting should have a clear purpose and an objective, an agenda that has been sent out ahead of time. There should still be basic ground rules for our meetings, like no cell phones and no multitasking, don't read email, don't work on your project. Be respectful of people's time, so when there is a meeting, it's important that people want to be engaged, they know why they're there. You still do want to have like those check-ins and huddles and how are we doing, but that's okay for that to be the defined purpose. Don't meet just to say you met. Always have that purpose that people understand. In terms of ramping up the engagement, use the tools that are available in whatever the software you're making use of: polling, whiteboarding, hand raising, checking with folks in the chat window. Make sure people are actively engaged in the meeting and not just passive participants. And then number one thing, with a bullet, always use video, okay? Yes, you're gonna have an audio option, just in case someone's having a technical issue, but the most basic ground rule is that everyone is on camera, visible, we can see our faces. That is not about making sure people are there. It's about helping people stay engaged. If I see someone's static profile picture or just a name, I'm not going to feel as engaged, right? And it just helps create that sense of team and community. The whole point of it is when you think about the things that work in a face-to-face meeting, the thought is, how do I replicate that online? You would not have a face-to-face meeting and face the other way. You wouldn't have a face-to-face meeting and put a hood over your head, right? People, that's ridiculous. Well, if you're not on video, it is essentially the same thing. So think about that, talk about it with your people, come up with these best practices together. If you don't have established meeting best practices or working agreements, come up with them together. That can be a great team activity. Again, try not to dictate solutions to your people, but involve them in the solutions. Involved people are engaged people, okay? Any questions so far? I'm still watching the chat window. As I said, don't just be talking at people. I feel like I'm all I'm doing here. We're working through this. So remember that your employees are people. This can be something easy to forget in a time of crisis. We want to allow people a chance to vent. We want to allow people a chance to talk about their emotions in their personal life. This is something that naturally happens in in-person meetings. When you walk into the room, it's how was your weekend, the dog is sick, things like that. Allow time for that emotional check-in at the beginning. How are people doing? And build that into the agenda. What you want to avoid, and this can be like walking a tightrope at times, is you don't want people oversharing health details. That's not appropriate for the work environment. You don't want arguments or politics or attacking others. We want to make sure it's professional, but still candid. We want to make sure it's personal, but still work appropriate. So walk that tightrope as a leader, encourage people to share as much as they're able to and much as they're comfortable with it. The main thing is you're providing an environment where that is safe and where that is okay. If someone chooses not to, that's perfectly fine. That's more perhaps in your one-on-one meetings. Definitely check in one-on-one if you know someone hasn't been sharing their emotional state. Make sure you check in with them and they have the ability to talk to you about how it's impacting the work, because ultimately that's what this is about. Is my personal situation going to impact my ability to deliver and to meet our goals? And as a leader, there are some things I can help with and some things I can't. My empathy might be just expressing concern, allowing them to vent a little bit. Other things maybe I can do something about. Maybe a piece of technology or something like that could help with a situation. So really important to check and keep checking in with them as people as part of that communication, making sure it's a two-way street. And so talking about information, you want to make sure that information is readily available to people. Now, this does not mean, again, flooding folks with emails, right? I do think an email recap of a meeting is a great idea for people who may not have caught something, make sure everyone's on the same page if someone isn't able to attend. It just has to be the decisions and results that came out of it. Other than that, I strongly advise setting up some kind of file sharing system or internal website so that any kind of either document, procedure, policies, that I know where it is and I know how to get to it. When you create documents or update documents, perfectly acceptable to send an email saying it's been updated, but provide a link to the document. Don't email the document around. That's one way to bury people. It's one way to cause out of sync versions. People will be referring to different versions of the document. Have a central repository. If your organization has not come up with a knowledge management strategy, now's the time. Okay, this is the time to think about how your organization shares information, because I just can't shout to the person at the next desk anymore saying, you know, where's that thing? Where's that document? We're helping people be self-sufficient as much as we're still creating an environment of team. So if you're not doing this as an organization already, this is something I highly recommend. It's a type of meeting called a retrospective. And a retrospective is a very particular meeting, usually held in organizations every other week, but if you're new to it, I encourage you to do it weekly. And it's really doing these three things. As a team, let's talk about what's going well. And I don't just mean, are we meeting project deadlines? Those should be happening in project meetings. This is, how are we operating as a team? What is working well in our work environment? What is not working well? Are we sticking to our meeting guidelines? Are we struggling with video? Are we meeting roadblocks in terms of our general work performance? And then for all the things that are not going well, what can we do to make them better? That last step is critical. Otherwise, it's just a venting session. And venting sessions don't do any good in the long run. People think that they do, but they don't, because eventually people get tired of venting, and you will hear that lovely phrase, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So coming up with an actual list of things that can be done to mitigate or fix the things that aren't going well, or even improve upon the things that are going well. And let's do more of that. Let's scale it out or whatever. And then as a leader, making sure those things are followed up with. This doesn't have to take a lot of time. Half hour to a 1 hour meeting once a week is not a huge investment. The important thing with your list of improvements is, first of all, don't try to fix everything at once. It's too much and it dilutes your efforts. Prioritize the items. What are the most important things to fix first? And then just kind of knock them out in order. And every week when you do this, have this meeting, or every other week, review the list. What have we fixed? What have we changed? Are we seeing results? Do we need to tweak it? What's the next item we're going to do? And the next, and the next, and the next. And again, have that team mentality. This isn't a list of to-dos for the boss. This is, how are we going to fix it? We feel this isn't going well. Here's something we think we can do about it. Who wants to take lead on this? Who wants to drive that? Share the workload. Okay, really, really important to keeping a highly effective and engaged team. And then lastly, have a sense of play, have a sense of fun. Remember, we talked about one of the positive motivators is play. So how do you build a sense of fun into a virtual work environment? It's important to be true to your culture, like whatever culture you've established before. If your culture before all this happened was playful and little informal, then keep that. If not, then how much are you comfortable bringing in? But a sense of play will increase people's engagement, increase their effectiveness. You don't want people checking out during this time, and play keeps people engaged. So not just using your creativity, but again, have your people think of things. What might they like to do? What might they want to do? I know many, many teams that are doing virtual coffee breaks and virtual happy hours. They're very successful. When I talk about social networking, I'm talking about internally. So when we talk about the tools later on, many of them have the news feed type of capability, and you can segment them. You can have a news feed just for social and personal stuff, and people can post pictures of their dog or the weirdest thing they saw today or funny memes, as long as they're workplace appropriate. But the idea is to have some fun. With your instant messaging software, setting up chat rooms specifically for just idle talk, coffee talk, right? Sharing how your day is going. I heard this joke, whatever. These things are really critically important. And contests and games are always fun. My wife's team actually won a contest recently. The goal was, having a fun Zoom meeting, right? And coming up with a video to demonstrate that. And they did this pass the mug video that was hilarious. And so it looked like each person was, one person would hold it up and then the next person would pull it from the bottom. It really looked like they were passing a mug all around between them, and it was hilarious. It doesn't have to even be that complicated, but how do you have a sense of fun? and build that into your day. So, lastly, adaptation, right? As I said, virtual workplaces aren't going anywhere. They are here to stay. In fact, even as the physical work environment opens back up, you should be asking yourself, okay, does virtual work for us? Do we want to continue to allow it? If maybe not 100%, but does it work for more of our employees than we thought? Questioning some of those assumptions that people have always had that we have to be in the office, right? So how are we going to adapt to this new world? Because not only is your workplace probably going to stay virtual for some time to come, but the people you're serving are also living in a virtual world. So one of the first things in adapting is what I call being action-oriented. This does not mean ignoring roadblocks. It means having a whole attitude of what are we going to do about it? Yes, there is a roadblock in our way, and we can sit and talk about the roadblock all day long. Or we can start to talk about how are we going to get around it, over it, under it, punch through it, or go in a different direction. Can't go north, let's go west, right? What are we going to do about it? Should be almost the standard refrain. You've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response that people have in a crisis, right? You want to focus on fight, and you want to help people, give them that support to think about fight. It's all about mitigation and elimination. One of the other things that's important in this time is to focus on outcomes rather than activities. One of the biggest roadblocks people are facing in a virtual world is the way they used to do business simply can't be done anymore, right? We had a process where paper passes back and forth, and we can't do that anymore. We would have in-person meetings and fundraisers, and we can't do that anymore. So, okay, that stinks. What are we going to do about it? That should be the common refrain. And when you're having these conversations, to think about, well, we used to do in-person fundraising, so we'll just replicate that. Okay. Instead, have the conversation, what made in-person fundraising effective, for example? What are the characteristics that made what we used to do so effective, assuming that it was? And then how do we translate that? How do we translate that characteristic of success to the virtual world rather than replicating the activity? Okay, so thinking about characteristics, outcomes, results, and how do we achieve that in our new reality rather than just a lift and shift of the task we used to do. Well, we used to meet in person, now we'll meet online. Well, maybe that's not the best way. Maybe that's not the best way to get a sense of engagement. So really have those conversations and questioning how we used to do things. Love the comments that are coming through in the chat window. Okay. Another thing to do here as you're being action oriented is taking the opportunity to revisit your metrics. The numbers by which you hold yourself accountable and hold yourself as successful, are they valid metrics in general, let alone for the new world? Are your metrics and measurements focused on outcomes rather than activities? You know, the classic example I give is if you're focusing on, say, fighting hunger in Chattanooga, I would much rather know the number of hungry people at any given day in Chattanooga rather than the number of meals we delivered. Okay, outcomes versus activities. So keep your team focused on that. And again, that we, not me mentality. One of the hallmarks of United Way, which I always loved, thinking we, not me. As a leader, again, it can be sometimes in a crisis, you want to pull back and say, I have to solve this, I have to do this. You don't. You have a team for that. You've hired good people, I hope. And this is the time to let them off the leash and say, okay, this is the roadblock we're having. How do we think we should solve this? And being action oriented. People have heard me say this phrase so often: when in doubt, do something. Don't let yourself get stopped. Don't let yourself get blocked. Even if you can only take one step, try it, see what happens. Encourage experimentation. Try things, take smart risks. Don't be nonchalant, don't be crazy, but you may have to take some more risks than you're used to in taking to try new ways of doing things. And going back to communication, that communication aspect applies to our stakeholders and customers as well. It's okay to tell people, hey, we're trying a new way of doing this. We want your feedback. We want your collaboration in making sure this is the best thing it can be. Encourage your team. Trust them. You want their ideas. You want them to experiment. You want creativity. It's not anarchy. We still have to talk to each other. Maybe at a certain level, say, if it's up to this, go ahead and try it. But if it's like this, check with me first. But let them off the leash. Crisis makes us want to grab control. The most successful teams and the most successful organizations are those that let go of control and continue to try new things and solve those problems. Okay, this is a good question. Can you share how to approach employees who are a bit different in nature, introverts or extroverts? Just as you would in the office place. That's a great question, Patrick. You have to approach people differently. There are introverts. Now, introverts is not the same thing as shy. It just means how they get their energy. So, for example, I would not allow is a harsh word, but I wouldn't allow someone who says, well, I'm an introvert, therefore I don't want to be on camera. No, that'd be like saying I'm an introvert, I don't want to come into the office. I'm an introvert, I don't want to come into work, right? Some of these things are going to be basic. However, with introverts, you can certainly be cautious of not calling them in a group setting, right? Maybe keeping a closer eye on their facial expressions, only possible on video. And then talk to people about the why of what you're doing. Don't just make an edict that we're all going to be on video. It's talk about why. We need to engage the team, stay connected, try to replace, if not replicate, the experiences that we all enjoyed when we were in the office. So explain why you're doing things is a big help. Certainly take people's individual needs into account, but don't let individual needs override what you know to be right decisions and common sense. So it's just kind of a general question, so it gets a bit of a general answer, but any good leader should be able to take the different needs of their workforce into account while still maintaining continuity and what's the right word I'm looking for, and a holistic way of treating the workforce. People do behave differently at face-to-face and virtual meetings, absolutely, and that is something as a leader for you to help overcome. Bringing in a sense of play definitely can help with that, right? It engages people, it gets them leaning in, and if it's truly fun, people will engage. And it takes practice, like any new skill, and this is where I encourage candor. Tell your people, this is going to take practice. It may be awkward at first, we may get it wrong. Be really open to feedback, right? Especially if you're the one facilitating and leading sessions. Make sure your people know it is okay to dissent and disagree, and then we can talk about it and come to a new consensus together. As long as you're focused on those goals. If your goal is a positive work environment, highly engaged team, highly effective team, those are your goals. You should certainly be open to suggestions from people on how to achieve that differently. That's a good question. And yes, you may find that when playing games, some people will not participate. I wouldn't call them out. Certainly it is something to just keep an eye on and talk to them maybe one-on-one. What you don't want is for people just to sit out entirely. How do we have different methods of engaging them, right? In an effective workforce, it's really never acceptable for someone to sit out 100%. You have to engage somehow. So the last part of adaptation is this is more than survival now. For your organization to be successful, for any business to be successful, you can't go into what I call bunker mentality. This is not a time to shut down and just try to survive and get through it. This is, first of all, it's our new age. And secondly, the more you kind of hunker down, the more you kind of come in on yourself, the less that you're able to serve your constituency. There are people that need your help. The whole reason that your nonprofit exists in the first place. And you cannot serve them as effectively and meet their needs and help them thrive if you're not trying to thrive yourself. One of the positive things, if you can say it that way, of a time like this is because there's so much that we're no longer able to do. We've had to, everyone's had to cancel meetings and get-togethers and just other things we cannot do in a virtual world. Well, that gives us time to focus on strategy. That gives us time to look at things that we know we've been needing to do and just haven't, right? The goals we have in place, do they still make sense? Are the way we're measuring things, is that still appropriate? Do we want to revise them, right? We had said that this particular project was our top priority. Does that still make sense in our current environment? Every organization I know of has a backlog of improvement projects, things they've been wanting to do if we only had the time. Well, now we have time. And let's take advantage of that. And above all, keep focused on your vision and mission. And I hope you have one. If you don't, certainly this is the time to create it and create it with your teams, either with your senior leadership team or with your entire organization. Make sure you have a really clear vision and mission, that everything you're doing is in support of that. That's a guiding star. That is what will help people stay engaged and focused. If they know why they're coming to work every day, if they know why they have to deal with the annoyances of a virtual world, right? No one is ever going to get excited over filling out a report. But if we know that our goal is about helping eliminate some basic social problem, and in order to do that, we have these funds available. In order to receive the funds, we fill out these reports. Now I know what I'm doing. It's not about the report. It's about solving that problem. And I directly see how the work I'm doing relates to that. So go through your stock, review your processes and procedures. Should they be changed? Not just because of the current situation, but again, maybe they need to be changed a long time ago. But does it still make sense? So focus on strategy. Meet people's needs, yes. Keep things going operationally, but that's not enough to thrive. There's a saying that I like, that you can't stand still in a moving river. So if you are in hunker down mentality, I'm just going to stay here and weather the storm, the river's moving on, the world is moving on, things are changing all around you. And if you don't take action, you may wind up to a point where you can't catch up anymore, or even worse, you drown. So thrive during this time. There is opportunity here. There's new things at play. The downside of the horrendous issue with unemployment is there are people who have time now. Your volunteer workforce may be a lot larger than you realize. There are people out there that would love to work on something, even for free, just to give them that sense of belonging, just to reaffirm their sense that they can add value. So it's not to take advantage of them, but you're actually serving their needs by giving them volunteer opportunities and meeting the needs of your stakeholders. So think about what opportunities are available to us now, and what are things that we can do now that we actually even couldn't do before, and take advantage of those. So that's a big part of all this. And the more you do that, the more your employees will rally behind you, and the more engaged they'll be, and the more effective they'll be. So let's wrap things up, and then we'll certainly have some time for questions. I'm not going to leave this slide up for too long, because as I said, I will make this slide deck available to people, but I've listed here a bunch of tools for video conferencing if you don't have it. Instant messaging is really critical. Again, think about how do you replace the experience of being in the office? And one of the biggest things about being in the office is ad hoc communication, where I can say, hey, Abby, did we ever get an answer from so-and-so? And Abby says, no, we didn't. Well, if I send an email to her and it sits in her mailbox forever and things like that, it's horrible. Now, yes, taken to a degree, these things can also become overwhelming. So you work together as a team. That's what the retrospectives are for. Say, hey, we implemented instant messaging, and now that's all I'm doing all day. The other nice thing about many of these instant messaging tools is they also allow for what's called a group chat. So basically, it's like a room or a channel that is always on, and people can look and see what was said yesterday or the last hour. That's where you can have some of those news feed or social media type things. So think about how you organize that and have whatever the software calls it, channels, rooms, whatever, Some for fun, maybe one per project, one per goal. Think about how you want to organize it, one per team. There are also great tools for work tracking, file sharing, polling. Polling is a great thing that you can do. A lot of software has it built in, but to also take a pulse outside of a meeting. So Zoom has a poll available, and you're all going to be asked to do one very shortly, but you can do it after the fact as well. And Poll Everywhere is a really cool tool I've used a lot that allows for live interactive polling. And then there are even online brainstorming tools where you have virtual post-its, and who doesn't love a good post-it? So this is the sum. I'm not going to read through all these, but basically this is what we're talking about here, right? Empathy, meeting needs, communication, and adaptation. Thrive, not survive. And then the absolutely most important thing to remember and the most important thing to communicate, it's all going to be okay, right? We will get through this. There are hardships. There will be loss, but this too shall pass. And that's what I'm saying. Don't Pollyanna it, don't sugarcoat it, but keep your focus and your people's focus. It is all going to be okay because we'll get through it together. So what questions do people have? That was a huge information dump, I realize. But what are people thinking? We have about 10 minutes. And I will ask that folks do hang around because there will be a survey so that Venture Forward can keep improving these experiences, and my own experience as well help me to continuously improve. So hopefully hang out through the Q&A and take part in the poll. But what questions do people have?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question for Michael. If you want to use the chat, you can also do it that way.
Quiet.
We're going to make you guys play a game in a second if you don't.
Right?
Come on.
Well, while people are thinking of questions, do you want to go ahead and put up the poll?
Sure.
Allow people to answer that.
So just because you see this poll does not mean we want you to leave. So please fill out this poll. This will just help us, not just us as a Venture Forward team, but also Michael as well. We do share these with Michael, our facilitators of all of our webinars, just so that they can improve, engage their particular facilitation as well. And then so we can gauge the next sort of efforts that we put out for you all as well.
And when I do send out the presentation, obviously everyone will then have my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have, or if you just want to have a conversation or deeper discussion about any of the items we talked about, I am at your disposal.
I'd be curious for those people who I know in the chat shared a couple ideas that you were using, like the Psych app or things like that. What was the feedback from your staff? Were they engaged? Were they not? Can you speak to some of that for those of you who commented?
This is Samantha with the CSO. My staff virtual hours, happy hours, were pretty much staff driven. I try and attend most of them, but all of these games have been all their ideas. People, if they're on the call but don't want to play, don't have to. We do include alcoholic adult beverages as people wish, but I do think it's been very helpful for the staff to stay connected that way. We do a weekly staff meeting, but this is just a way for all of us to talk about non-work things at least once a week.
That's awesome. I see a question from Nancy about how do you recreate AdHoc Conversations. So this is what I was referring to when I talk about software related to instant messaging. So instant messaging is kind of like texting, but it's on the computer and it's kind of what I'll call always on. I mean, you can sign in and out, but the idea, if you've used anything like Slack or even this chat window is an example of instant messaging. And the idea is you're giving people that environment to have those ad hoc conversations. because that's just always there. And I can start messaging someone, asking a quick question, or even message a group of people. There is that, it becomes a little bit like Facebook, if you will, because you can have the message between specific people privately, or you can have that news feed type of scroll where you can go back and see what was said before and kind of poke in and out of it. So there is technology that you can use to create as much as possible the idea of those hallway conversations. Tips for when people transition back in the office. I'm concerned the transition will be difficult if not imposed intentionally. Great question, Abigail. Managing the transition back into the office is huge. There's certainly a lot of information out there on the web about it. I would advise you to read, but from this perspective, again, work with your team, right? So focus on needs, right? Are people ready to come back into the office? When a decision is made, how has that decision come from? For example, are you just deciding, hey, now it's time to come back? Are people ready? Why are we pushing for it? So to really think about the decisions about why are you coming back into the office? Are people ready for it? And as I talk about giving people that flexibility, does it have to be all or nothing? Does everyone have to come back at the same time? Are you willing to allow people to more permanently work from home, or some amount of people? And I think, again, talk about it with the team. So if you think, look, the work we do, I'm making stuff, I don't know your organization, but if we're running, say, a food bank, we have to physically be there, right? We have to collect food, we have to hand out the food. Now, on one hand, can we develop some no-touch ways of delivering food and gathering food? Again, give that challenge to your people. But to say, I think it's okay as a leader, say to your team, I don't see any other way to accomplish X without us being in the office. What ideas do you people have? That kind of thing. So it's about inclusion, work through it with your team, start with the why, be flexible. What are some techniques to virtually build empathy? This is funny. So virtual empathy, I'm going to say, is not a thing. You can have empathy, you can build empathy without doing it face to face, let's say, well, without being in the same room. I do believe it is about communicating one-on-one. So techniques to build empathy. One of the first ones is to practice active listening and listening without bias or judgment. When someone says, for example, I feel scared in this current environment, you cannot assume you know why, right? You may know why you're scared, but that might not be why they're scared. And encourage them to share, what is it that's leading you? What's making you feel this way? And to even say, I'd like to understand more about how you're feeling. Try not to solve unless they're particularly asking for a solve. This is the biggest thing, is to not hijack. They may just want to express their fears and be told it's okay that you feel that way, and they don't want it solved. Leaders in particular sometimes have a hard time with not being problem solvers. It can be okay to ask, is that something you'd like help with? Would you like to discuss some ideas about that? Or I'm happy just to listen. And the biggest thing is to even just simple things like saying, yeah, I get it. I understand why that would be hard. I would also advise avoiding phrases like, I know how you feel. Again, you don't. You might understand what they're saying, and you might believe you understand. And the other thing is to not hijack in terms of your own experiences. My kids are driving me crazy because of this quarantine. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, my kids are too. Let me tell you what they did. Well, now it's all about you. So empathy is around keeping the focus on them, at least for that time period, acknowledging, seeking understanding, active listening, but do not make it about you. These are really good questions. What else are people thinking about? Or just even having any concerns that folks might have. So there's a good thing from Angie here. It's rated at our next team Zoom meeting. I'm having my staff form 2 cohort groups. One will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other Tuesday, Thursday for in-office work. They will not have to come in every day. Their group does, but they cannot come in on other days. That's a great idea. That's a fantastic idea, and that may work for some organizations, may not. For getting actual ideas, certainly reaching out to your fellow nonprofit leaders is great. Again, there's tons of stuff available on Google, but I'll continue to stress as much as you can, try to come up with these solutions with your team and not dictated to your team. When we're talking about employee engagement, the more they're included, the more they'll want to be included, the more they'll want to be engaged. Engagement is not something you can mandate. It is something you have to, in some ways, earn or empower. Certainly, and Patrick, I don't know if you guys have talked about this. This might be something that Venture Forward can help facilitate, maybe with some discussion boards. I don't know if you've talked about setting up Slack channels or whatever medium to allow exactly this kind of thing, this collaboration.
Funny how you asked that.
It wasn't even a setup.
Just now begun talking about the possibility of, of putting a workspace on Slack together just to foster, continued conversation and communication amongst our nonprofit professionals. We have not launched that yet, but we wanted to get a, kind of gauge an interest level from everybody first. So maybe that's a good quick poll. So open up your participant window. That's going to be an interesting thing. Let's see if this works, right? If you click on participants in your control panel, your should pop up a little window, and you should see some icons that say yes, no, go slower, go faster. And let's just ask that. Would you, as a professional, nonprofit professional, be interested if Venture Forward, initiated or started up a Slack workspace? Would you be willing, or would you be inclined to join that Slack for the purpose of just continuing online discussion virtually with other nonprofit professionals? So you can click a yes or a no. Yeah, look at that. Great. And that's good. We like the honest feedback. We like the yeses and the nos. It's fine. We agree with both. We also
Patrick,
know,
I'm going to turn it back to you as we are just about out of time.
Yeah, we also know that some of the virtual things like this are, like Slack and other things, they're still new, and they're still, there's a segment of our workforce that, are just non-inclined to using them or not comfortable using them. And so there's a lot of education that goes there too. So wanted just to say thank you to Michael for his time and sharing some of his expertise around this. We know this is an important topic, especially as you guys all consider ways to keep your employees engaged and active and loved on, and helping them understand that their feelings and their emotions are important as well. Love some of the things, just recapping really quickly, some of the notes I took was like considering motivators, like what are the positive and negative motivations of your staff right now? That is such a great question. I would love to for dig in there a little bit more on that for sure. Opportunities to build empathy, looking, just remembering that employees are people first. They're not just business. It's employees. So a lot there. Again, thank you. We will follow up with this with an email with the slide deck, of course, that Michael said he'd share, as well as some challenges to maybe take this further, and maybe some of the resources that he also mentioned. We'll share some of those as well. Be on the lookout for other webinars that are coming up. For those of you who are considering a re-entry, a reopen, we are trying to organize a reopening panel conversation. So be on the lookout for that webinar. It'll be on Venture Forward's upcoming trainings website. So be on the lookout for that. Other than that, we'll stick around here for a little bit more in case anybody else has any questions, but have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar today.